was low key for once. We didn't, the question was in travel. We just stayed put and it snowed on and it was kind of nice.
We did get snowed out, didn't we?
We did story down 6 experience. So.
Oh, really?
No, it was better. I do traction for
Mark, I had a senator call me. I had two senators.
Observations?
Yeah. Kim's work finally got some movement, and she's really a little bit on the last couple, just on the AG generating and getting some legal. I wouldn't say guidance or advice, but just getting. Oh, absolutely, go for it. Yeah, and this is
They come in and they say, I'll just ask about it.
one assistant attorney general that we have
outside in the quad, and Alan Christensen's is serving.
It's going to be
That's Representative. He's
Hey, Scott.
so great in the legislature.
Yeah, because there are things like across the country where they say, you know, I'm going to play and they decide yes or no.
That would be a challenge if you didn't know it. Just on the general, right? But
that way we can everyone will see.
Running around, right?
How many spots?
I
Okay.
mean, if we don't get a
So
legal
why don't
opinion
I'll
done
come back
on
to
it,
it.
I think what
Okay,
I
perfect.
see happening.
Okay,
guys.
thank you.
I don't think we're going to participate. I honestly don't think so.
Before you
No, we did as far as the
don't see her here yet.
She's doing a web.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that's fine. We're easy.
Same building, we're in different.
Board members, if we can get you to take your seats, we're going to get ready for our Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind board meeting. So thank you. Want to welcome everyone here today. We've got a few board members that will be popping right back into here. Want to welcome everyone for emergencies and that. You guys probably get tired of hearing this, but it's good to review it. In case of emergency, we exit to the east or out these doors. On the side, we go in the hallway, we turn right or left, exit the building. Those are our exterior exits. We also have restrooms are right across the hall here to the east. So let's dive right into our agenda here. Let's go right to public comment first. We have, want to invite Susie Blackham and Alexa Redford to come up. There you go.
Thanks. Most of you know me. I'm just introducing myself again. I'm Susie Blackham. I'm here representing our Educators Association for USDB, and I brought another colleague with me just to introduce herself.
Alexis Redford, I'm a teacher for the blind, and I'm, I guess, with Susie representing the same.
Susie and Alexis, thank you for being here. You can.
Thank you.
Did you want to do a public? Did you want to make a public comment?
We just wanted to introduce ourselves.
Okay, that is a fantastic public comment. Thank you. We thought we already knew you, but it's good to meet Alexis. Okay, thank you. Okay, next thing I'm seeking a motion to approve the minutes of the November 8, 2019 meeting. We have a motion. We have a second. Got him. Not seeing any discussion to the motion. Let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Voting was unanimous. Next, we'll have our monthly budget report from Carl MP, the Finance Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and board members. Happy holidays to each and every one of you. The financial report today is for the first 4 months ending October 31st. Our revenues and inflows were $12.2 million. Our expenditures were $10.8 million. So we had $1.3 million more in revenues and inflows than we did expenditures. As you can see on the financial report, the majority of our revenues comes from the state. Of the $12.2 million, $11.1 million comes from the state, and just under $1 million comes from the feds on a grant. The number of students served as of October 31st is 1,671. Our land grant enrichment fund balance as of the end of October is $1,304,433, and the donated funds is $1,191,431. The report right behind the financial report is the budget status report that gives all the supporting detail of the revenues of the numbers that we just went over. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on the first 4 months financial results.
Any questions from board members on the financial reports? I'm seeing none. Please continue.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our enrichment fund balance of the projects that you approved last year, or last May, excuse me, of $1.6 million, we have spent $230,000, I'm just going to round up to $238,000, leaving a balance of $768,000 to be spent before the end of June 30th. The next report is just the donated fund summary of the $1.1 million. It gives the balance by each of the programs and each of the directors and superintendency. If you have any questions on enrichment funds or donated funds, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
Any questions from board members on the donated funds and enrichment funds? I'm not seeing you, but thank you for these reports, and they come in early, and it seems right now that everything's on track for success, or to quote others, on the road to awesome. So
Thank you.
appreciate your good work and your due diligence.
Merry
in
Christmas to you
keeping-
too. Thank you.
Keeping those reports current. I think that concludes
That does conclude my report, Mr.
the
Chairman.
report. Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have a time certain at 11:30. Our USDB Advisory Council report is coming from the council chair, Karen Harrop, but how is that coming on?
It's a WebEx, so it'll come up on the screen.
It will show up all by itself without any help.
Yes.
And it worked yesterday.
Wednesday.
Okay, maybe if we could, I could go to the superintendent and you could talk for a few minutes before we get into some of these other things. You can maybe get into your, a portion of your report. There we go.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just jump right to the end and do our superintendent's report pretty quickly. I have just a couple items. One is just to let you know, we've been continuing to hold our Ask Us Anything events with our own staff members around the state, and those are going well. I've reported that the last couple months, and I really like it. It's a new thing, and I think it matters. We've gotten really good feedback from them. And mostly they just like to have face-to-face and direct contact, I think, with leadership more often, especially where we have people spread out all over. We'll go to a place and have other people zoom in if they're way far away, and it's really good. Second thing is an update on our Springville building, which is getting very close to completion. In the next 3 weeks, it'll essentially be done and ready for occupancy. We will be moving in right after New Year's to that place, and it's generating a lot of interest in that area in Utah County, and especially in the Springville and southern Provo type areas around there. We are going next week, and the week after, we have a couple of different days when we are going to take our faculty there. The teachers are interested in seeing it, and so we've opened it up to them and arranged it with all of the construction crews. And so we will be sending those dates to you in case you're interested in a sneak peek. If not, we'll be having a grand opening, but it will be later in the springtime because we want to invite legislators and other stakeholders and everybody. And so it'll be nicer than doing it right here in the middle of the winter. And we'll have some of the punch lists finished by that time as well. So that'll be a big event that you can also be welcome to attend, of course. We've had a lot of media interest in that. There was one article in the Provo Daily Herald already, and then this coming week on Monday, Fox 13 News will be going down there and interviewing us, and it's really great coverage so far, and I think people are excited. And through social media, the communities, the deaf communities and those in the blind community already are kind of chiming in and saying, well, why this and why that? They're asking all these questions, and so that's really good. I'll tell you the real reason it's good in my mind is that the word's getting out to families that might not know they have access to our resources throughout the state. Any coverage we can get is good. Most of them we really get to, especially with our early intervention, but every year we find children here and there who's for some reason slipped through the cracks and their districts didn't know or their parents didn't know, and they come in and say, oh, we wish we would have known about this earlier. So we're excited about that. And then also along those lines, there was something else about that area. No, I guess that's probably it. The last item that I had for my superintendent report today was something you might have seen in the media recently. It's very, very exciting. We had an Eagle Scout who did an amazing project this week. And Carolyn, would you mind just describing exactly what happened with that, since it was one of our blind students? There you go.
Voice will hold up. So yesterday we had one of our former students and a student that we've provided services to throughout the year when he's in his own school district, decided that he wanted to get his Eagle Scout project. and put it out on Facebook and put it out through his local congregation and through neighborhoods and word of mouth. And it took him about 6 to 8 weeks, I believe, but he collected several $1,000s in donations. Or I would say, I won't say several thousand, but a lot of money, enough to contribute 71 white canes to USDB for our students and for students throughout the state. And he had extra money, so he brought toys that he thought were fun for kids who were blind and visually impaired. So him and his mom and dad came yesterday. We had some great news coverage, and he does suffer from some communication issues right now as well. But his dad just stepped in and advocated for him and just explained what a great project it was. And it was not only heartwarming, but congratulatory. It was awesome.
Yes.
He was just beaming from ear to ear.
This
So
was a really big deal. And we had coverage from Channel 2, Channel 4, Fox 13, and Susan has been gathering those links today, so I will be just emailing them out to you later, and you can go view those on your own time. It's pretty awesome. I saw comments on our social media where we pushed out the original story, and people were like, "Oh, I'm crying," you know. And anyway, it's really an awesome thing. So that was basically.
So was he able, has he completed his Eagle then? Was this his last? Usually they'll do their project and they'll have 1 or 2 merit badges to complete. So this was.
his whole.
So he's got his Eagle now, and
Yeah.
yeah, good, very good.
Yes. And you'll see when you look at the news stories, he's standing there with all of his merit badges on his sash, and he's very excited. That's quite an accomplishment.
Asked him, I said, "Well, what were your favorite 2 badges that you got?" And he goes, "Shooting and archery." And I went, "Cameron, oh, well, how is that possible?" And he goes, "All things are possible."
It's
So,
possible.
yeah, and I
It is
believe it with his
possible.
mom and dad. They were awesome.
Oh, that's good. Did you have anything else in your?
That was all for my superintendent report today. So,
Okay. It's not happening?
Well, it looks like it's trying to happen.
Don't ask me to fix it. So something's trying to come online, so we'll,
She's on, but we don't see her.
let's just pause for a minute and I wonder if it's worth reaching out to her and seeing.
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me? Oh dear.
oh, that's from a bad movie.
I can definitely hear you, Joe.
Is that my batteries or my?
Is that better? So I think you're able to hear me, but I'm not sure I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Perfect.
Hey,
Yes.
the mic is on. Okay.
Okay.
Council Chair Harrop, do you have a report or an update that you would like to share?
I do. Thank you. Thank you,
time.
Chair and board members, for giving me a few minutes to be able to share out. I appreciate it. Just a couple of maybe top items to share, but if there are other things you would like me to comment or report out on, please let me know and I'd be happy to do so. One of the first things is that we have a vastly new council. I would say it feels like almost half of our council is new within the past couple of months. And we have new members who have brought to the table a great level of participation and activity and discussions. And that has been phenomenal. And the structures of our meetings so far have been to have presentations on programs or current issues surrounding USDB. And then as a council, I feel like we've become very active in saying, now what? So instead of just taking passively in the information we're hearing, we're asking the question of now what, trying to move us from a passive council to a little bit more of an active council. And asking questions like, how does the council promote the effectiveness of this program you're presenting to us? How can we support it? How can we have a positive impact on the growth of this current issue or addressing the current issue that you're sharing with us? And so we've had a real interactive dialogue about the real trenches work of USDB and tried to take the focus of how we can collaborate to further the efforts that are aligned in the mission and the vision statements of USDB. And Joel and Carolyn, if you have anything you want to add as I go along on, if you feel like I'm correctly representing those views and those thoughts or anything you want to add, please jump in. So that has been one of our focuses, and as a direct result, I think of those focuses, we have had a few changes that we've put in that I'd love to share with the board. One of them is Student of the Month. We have initiated a program where we have a student alternating every other month from the deaf school and the blind school that comes and is able to share with us, based on nomination of his teachers and his staff that is working with the student, the amazing things that they are doing and accomplishing. And that has been, from my perspective, and I think I represent the council in saying, phenomenal. It has been fantastic to have students come and report to the council the things that they're learning, the things that they're actively engaged in, and being able to celebrate with them their achievements and they're pushing to a higher level. And so we have had 2 deaf students so far come to the council and 1 student with a visual impairment. And those, I would say, are highlights of the meeting. I don't know if you would agree with me on that, Joel and Carolyn, but it is fantastic to be student focused. So the other piece I would like to share with the council that in taking that more active role, we are implementing in the beginning of the new year are staff celebrations as well. So looking at staff who are achieving exceptional and fantastic things that are aligned to the mission and the vision of USDB and recognizing them for that. So that is one thing that we want to start in the new year. So we'll have the Student of the Month and then the staff of the month as well. One of the other things we're looking at that I wanted to report out was the Reading Clinic. That is an after-school program for the School for the Deaf that's designed to provide intensive reading intervention, utilizing an evidence-based program called STEPS from the University of Utah. It was established 3 years ago. I had an opportunity to walk through the program with a representative from the University of Utah Reading Clinic few months ago and saw that there was probably some extra work and effort we can put in that to help promote greater student growth data in the area of reading. And so the advisory council voted to recommend funding for a little bit of an overhaul on that reading clinic program, which included partnering with the University of Utah, providing instruction to the tutors in that program, but also having those University of Utah professionals coming and observing implementation and giving real-time feedback to the tutors so that we can make sure there's a fidelity of implementation in those reading programs. I received observation notes this last week from the University of Utah clinicians, which was overwhelmingly positive for the observation data that she saw. She saw positive growth in teacher and staff implementation based on the trainings that have been held for them, but the student growth data was really amazing. And so that's another piece I wanted to share out with the board, that involvement of the board and the council in helping promote that reading clinic, is doing amazing things for our students who are deaf, who, for the most part, reading is a huge challenge for them. So this extra intervention is having a tremendous impact. So those are just, I don't want to take too much of your time, but those just are a few things that the council is actively engaged in, and wanted to report back to the board.
Thank you, Chair Harrop. The superintendent wanted to weigh in on some of this, so I'll go to the superintendent.
Karen, I'm grateful for your report, and I just wanted the board to know how much we are currently enjoying our relationship with the advisory council. I can say that I think we're enjoying it more than we have at any time since I've been there. It's a tremendous group, and they are actively asking and engaging, and not just sitting there and listening to whatever we're saying. That's kind of a balance we've desired for a long time, and so under the leadership of Chair Harrop, it's just happening. They also have this nice balance of being supportive and respectful, but also challenging us and making us think hard and really consider why we're the why in addition to the what and the how with what we're doing. And so I just thought it would be good to publicly acknowledge how grateful we are for Karen's leadership and the other members of the council as well.
Board members, do you have any questions for Chair Harrop at this time? Am I saying, Karen, am I saying, I always say Harrop, but is it Harrop or Harrop?
You know, I will respond to either of those because those are probably the nicest things I'll be called today, but mostly it's Harrop.
Harrop, got it. Okay. I just want to, we've got Board Member Janet Cannon.
I was interested in your after-school reading clinic, and I've just looked this up a little bit online, the STEPS program, and they're suggesting using it for kids with ADHD and kids with learning disabilities. And I'm wondering what your experience is like using it with deaf and blind students. Could you report on that a little bit?
Yes, I think I'd love to. So we implemented the STEPS program, and Carolyn, I'm going to ask for, you got a better memory than I do, but I would say we probably started it almost 8 years ago with USDB, and we have had to make some really unique tweaks to the program to accommodate the disabilities. So on the blind side, working with the Braille and working with some additional instructional strategies that are effective for students with visual impairments. The University of Utah Clinic and a couple of their clinicians have been phenomenal to sit down with us and say, hey, here's this piece that we want to bring to the table that we feel is really vital for students with visual impairments. Here's your evidence-based program. How do we marry these two? And out of it has risen this unique, tailored, but still keeping the fidelity of the reading program intervention for students. We've had to do the same on the deaf side. So we've brought some of those unique pieces to the table, but across the board, we have seen fantastic growth on the School for the Blind side who've used it. And with the fidelity that we're making sure is true in the implementation on the deaf school and the reading clinic, we're seeing that growth as well. From a personal perspective, this is a program that we use with students I work with learning disabilities, and that was kind of where I knew that it was an effective program because of the results that we've seen in implementing it on a school district basis. And so across the board, it has been an excellent input for us. But Carolyn, is there anything you want to add to that?
Carolyn, I'm turning her mic on. It's on. It should be on.
Thank you. I hope it's on. It is.
Carolyn.
Yes, I mean, we did this many, many years ago, and it was phenomenal. In our first year of implementation, and we just did it on our campus program first, we went from someone who increased 2 grade levels in their reading. It was, we were so amazed. And then immediately we started with all of our kids, and then most every teacher that we have has been through the University of Utah Clinic to do this, because it has made such a phenomenal difference, not only on our campus kids, but with our outreach or itinerant teachers. They have found great success with their kids. So kudos to it. It's a great program.
On the deaf side, we started it a few years ago, and then what happens is there are modifications that have to be made for the deaf and hard of hearing, because obviously there's lots of phonics involved with it, and those kids who can do phonics, we use the phonics with them. But those who can't, you have to do some modifications. So we pulled it back and did some more instruction on how to maintain some of the fidelity of the program, and then there's pieces of the program that we can't do with some of the students. So, but we have a lot of tutors there. They're being retrained to do precisely what the STEPS program does. And like I said, and we're going to roll out the next section the next time. So right now we're starting with the very beginning steps, and there's other alternating steps afterwards that we'll follow through with.
Okay. Sorry, Michelle, I didn't mean to leave you out. I didn't see you in the picture there, so I didn't think you were there. But this is part of, with the after-school program, it's part of a progressive plan. We're in phase 1, so to speak, like Michelle said, of starting with certain parts of the STEPS program, mastering those, and then next year move to phase 2, which is additional components.
Chair Harrop, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. I really appreciate your report and appreciate your leadership, chairing, especially with new members, and that I'm sure you have them oriented on their limitations and why they're there and what they can and can't do. And if there's anything we can do on our end to be supportive with your leadership there, please feel free to reach out. And also, will you share our appreciation to the council there on your next meeting? We're excited about these outcomes and your role in our deaf and blind community. So thank you for your willingness to serve.
Pleasure. I'm happy to do it, and I will definitely pass on your message of gratitude to the others.
Okay, and thank you, and have a great day. You're welcome
too.
to hang in here on this conversation as we have more presentations. Next, we'll have, this is item 6, Stephanie Mathis, Executive Director of the Siegel Lilly Center for the Abused Deaf. Is that our next presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Maybe I can introduce Stephanie while she's coming
Please do.
So Stephanie came and presented to our advisory council, and she's a good friend, but also just an amazing presenter and professional. Stephanie has been involved. You might have remembered that I mentioned earlier that our students created a Hope Squad for deaf and hard of hearing students throughout the state after realizing that they were empowered to do this and find their peers around the state. Stephanie, we brought her in just on a contract to help staff that. And anyway, she presented recently to our advisory council, and the advisory council and our administration felt like, you know, this would really be an excellent presentation for the board to help to understand the students that we're all responsible for. And so with that introduction, I'll turn the time over to Stephanie, and you'll enjoy it as much as we do, I hope.
Thank you. Okay, great. I'm very honored to be here today to meet all of you, members of the board. I'd like to discuss something that's very dear to me. This presentation is going to be more focused on a couple concepts: trauma-informed care and how to identify trauma in the deaf community, in addition to social emotional learning, and how that does impact these students. Those are going to be my talking points today. I hope that this presentation has information that can spark ideas and brainstorming and further conversations for developing a curriculum looking to address that social emotional learning need and also contribute to positive mental health growth. That is my goal of the presentation today.
Do you mind sharing with them your credentials?
Yes, sure. I have an associate clinical mental health counseling license here in the state of Utah. I provide therapy services and have been for clients of all ages for 5 years now. I have been a director for 11 years. I also work closely with victims of abuse and have been since 2008. So all of that work is kind of my credentials there. Thank you. And go ahead to the next slide. I would like to start with this video. It is a 6-second video, or just a few seconds really, if we could go ahead and play that. I don't know if it does have any voice in it. Oh, let's back up on that.
Oh, there's no sound? Oh, there.
This is my son, Wesley. He is deaf, and he is perfect. The reason why I love that video and included it is that perspective of having a deaf baby and it being born perfectly. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So if you really think about it, babies are born complete. They don't know any different of themselves, whether they're deaf or not. A baby that is born deaf never really lost their hearing. What if we came from that different perspective and took a look at how the baby views the world in their eyes? We took a turn in their shoes as they progress through their life and development. And it really begets the question is, how do we change our perspective from to the whole child perspective instead of what's wrong with this child perspective? I have a quote here that I included that I really like. It's very, very powerful. I would like to bring that up. For a blind or deaf child, blindness or deafness represent normality, not a condition of illness. He senses the handicap in question only indirectly or secondarily as a result of his social experiences. What then does a hearing loss mean in and of itself? It must be accepted that blindness and deafness indicate nothing other than the mere absence of one means of forming conditional links with the environment. This was written in 1925, but that philosophy, that line of thinking of the deaf child doesn't know there's something wrong with them until someone else tells them that they have this disability. With that in mind, what is the baby's first environment? It is family, it is parents, it is doctors, it is the school, so on and so forth. That becomes part of their environment, and they are constantly building relationships and interacting with these types of people, and these people are sending them different messages about themselves. I like this quote because it shows how we should perceive the baby as a whole child, and as opposed to just telling them that there's something wrong with them, if that makes sense. To the next slide, please. The environment does contribute to what we term social emotional development, and I would like to stress that social emotional development includes the child's experiences, what they're experiencing with their family and people that they're interacting with, and how they express themselves, and how they are even able to express themselves depending on the environment that they're in. How they manage their emotions, and how they are able to develop positive and beneficial relationships with other people play into that as well. That is the focus of social emotional development, to make sure that every child in USDB gets healthy environmental stimulus where they can develop those skills. And that's really the meaning of this term here, the philosophy behind it. And then next slide, please. Of course, deaf children don't have access to everything. So for this reason, they are at a high risk for mental health issues. So for example, we've got a few examples here. There was a study that was performed, I can't remember what year, but they did research comparing the deaf population to the hearing population, and they did notice that there was a difference there. They saw that in the deaf population, if they didn't have access to communication with their own family, there was an impact to their mental health. If they didn't have access to resources in the community, such as counseling or other services they may need, or even medical services, those are issues that are still common today, getting an interpreter for appointments, things like that. Those types of frustrations impact mental health. It also results in more stress in daily life with communication. Even going to the grocery store can be stressful for a deaf adult. If a child doesn't even know how to communicate with these hearing people in the general population, even just ordering food at a restaurant, that can be very stressful for a deaf individual. How do I know that these people are understanding me? So those contribute to a high risk factor. When it comes to educational programs, not all educational programs are prepared to meet the needs of the deaf child and the mental health needs as well as the academic. They're not always prepared to address anxiety, suicidal tendencies, depression, and things like that, including ADHD, as was mentioned. Suicidal tendencies and depression is something that most schools or a lot of schools aren't prepared to handle, especially in a deaf child. Research also shows that comparing a deaf and hearing child, there are more mental health struggles and issues that appear in the deaf population. Next slide, please. Research also talks about having early access to communication with peers and family determines a greater rate of success for the rest of their life. So any improvement in access in the world around them also positively affects their mental health. There's a correlation there. The interesting thing to note here in the second section is receiving direct communication, emphasis on that direct. For the last few weeks, I've been getting a lot of phone calls in regards to people looking for a counselor to provide services who also knows sign language. Here in the state of Utah, we're pretty lucky. We've got about 10 counselors who are fluent in American Sign Language. Only 3 of them are deaf themselves. And most of them prefer a signing therapist rather than working through an interpreter with a therapist. Even though you can use both options, most deaf people do prefer that direct interaction. Working through an interpreter loses a lot of opportunity for rapport building, and rapport building is a very important part of the therapeutic process. I'd also like to talk about the trauma-informed perspective and what type of trauma a deaf child may go through. I only chose 6 different categories. If we can pull up the next slide. So evidently here, not having communication access at home is the very first environment that a deaf child shows up in and is born to. So not having communication access, such as at the dinner table. So a lot of people will call it like dinner table syndrome. That's even a common phrase in the deaf community now because everybody's talking, nobody's signing, and they have no access to what's going on around them. That can be very traumatic for them. Not having information or knowledge can be very emotional, incidental information. There's a lot of things that just don't come naturally to them due to that access. Language disruptions or delays. I had clients that say, I know I don't write well. It's so frustrating. I would like to be able to write as well as other people. That's frustrating. That's very traumatic. I can't even express myself in the way I should be able to. That's very frustrating. The fourth one is not having that sense of belonging. We can't have a sense of belonging if we don't have communication. That is foundational. Communication is a tool to developing that sense of belonging. The next one is traumatic reparative surgery. For this one, there are a lot of clients that I've had that mention that their family has never communicated with them about the surgeries they've experienced before it happened. They walk in, they get put under, the surgery happens, they wake up, they have this surgery happen to them, and that can be very traumatic. Another sense of trauma is the results of that surgery. Sometimes, in some cases, they can hear ringing or different sounds that never cease. The last part is working with people that don't understand them. That can be very frustrating. Even myself, as a deaf individual, I consider myself healthy. And in an environment where I don't have access to sign language, I do become a little more shy. I withdraw my personality. And in the deaf community, I'm very outspoken. I'm very much myself. But when I'm not in that community without that access, I'm a lot more timid. Last night, I went to Park City to be part of a panel. I arrived before the interpreter did and already felt a little bit stressed trying to navigate that environment and making sure that people could understand me. That can be very stressful and traumatic for even these young deaf children, and it impacts them the rest of their life. So just one example of that. And then trauma is really the focus of what my work has been, so I hit on trauma a lot. There has been research done at RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology, where they have found that the deaf population experiences abuse 2 times as much as the hearing population. And if you think about it, statistically speaking, It is 1 out of 3 women will experience abuse in the hearing population. In the deaf population, that's double. So we're looking at 2/3 now, which is extremely high risk. They're considered a very vulnerable population, easy to take advantage of. So that's something I would like to emphasize, that they're very high risk. Next slide. And in regards to trauma, I know there's an assessment provided, the ACE, the Adverse Childhood Experience Assessment. Unfortunately, it is not designed or normed for the deaf population to show those adverse experiences. It shows that the more experiences a child may have, the more it impacts their mental health, the more it impacts their life expectancy, the more it impacts their addiction tendencies. And addiction, not necessarily only to substance abuse, but also pornography and other types of addiction as well, gambling, what have you. So this is a predictor, an assessment that predicts of how much trauma a child has and where that tends to lead them. So just a little bit of information I'd like to show. Because of all the trauma that these children tend to experience, that tends to manifest itself more in behavior. And when a child does not receive communication access at home, they have frustrations with being able to express themselves, that is redirected through behavior. That is typical with most children, but in the deaf population, it's even more so because they don't have communication access. This is an interesting note. It talks about language and communication and how that can help behavior. If a child has language, they have a tool to manage their life. So the more communication access they have, the more they'll be able to manage their own emotions. And the last bullet there states, deaf children that show better communication skills are better able to manage their behavior and attend better and be less impulsive. Sometimes deaf children are misdiagnosed as having ADHD when really they're just frustrated with the lack of communication in their life. Just another note to consider. In regards to the family environment, it is so important for the child and their self-esteem. If you look at the second bullet here on this slide, it talks about how if the deaf child feels that the family is not able to understand them, they are 4 times more likely to suffer from mental health disorders. The most common ones are borderline personality disorder, anxiety, and depression. I'd also like to show what you typically see in a child that does not have communication access. So aggressiveness, lack of attention, depression, suicidal tendencies, more impulsive, temper tantrums, anger, addiction. I think it's very important to look at that very last statement, lack of empathy. I see that a lot because they never learn that in the home environment, how to show empathy, how to understand another person's pain. A lot of times it's like, someone else is suffering, what do I care? I don't care if someone else is hurting. And I have to really work through that. That's not appropriate, that's not nice. That's something they don't learn at home because they didn't have communication access. Now I'd like to circle back to what message the deaf child receives. And they are considered microaggressive, meaning it's not always obvious, but they can be oppressed. So here's a quote from one of my clients, who is a young client. I do see teenage clients as well and work with them. I even watched a therapy session with a deaf child and their hearing parent present. And I used an interpreter because the parent spoke a different language, a foreign language. And it was very interesting to note that the child was very frustrated that they couldn't talk about deeper concepts with their own parent. They kept mentioning, I wish you would learn sign language. And the parent does have minimal sign language skills, but this child insisted, I wish you would learn sign language. And the parent's reaction was that first line there on the slide. I don't have time. But what message is that really sending to the child? You're not important enough for me to learn sign language. And the child feels that. Oftentimes, parents think that they can't sign well enough. Oh, we understand each other, but when the child comes up to me, the parent doesn't understand what they're saying. It surprises me that a lot of parents think of just functional signing and that's good enough. Like, can you eat? Bedtime. Do your homework. But that's not really getting to their dreams, their struggles, their pain. It doesn't flush all of that out, which is very difficult for them to grow social emotionally when they don't have that. And that is very common. Another little thing I'd like to mention is I wish you could speak like someone else. So if a deaf child doesn't speak and another deaf child can speak, and they both visit a particular family, parents will often say to their own child, I wish you could talk just like Johnny over here. Which completely belittles the child and traumatizes them, really. It's just little things that people don't think about that really hurts their own children. The last line there, if you could look at the slide. We've had a student who's not yet 18, who speaks well, has a cochlear implant, hears well, but is suicidal. And the reason being is because the family doesn't accept them, all of them. And they keep telling her, oh, you can hear, you don't need captions, just read their lips. And she doesn't feel that her own family accepts her for who she is entirely, just the listening and speaking part of her. You can accept that part of me, but you can accept the sighting part of me or the deaf part of me, the social part of me. So that has a very powerful impact on their mental health. The next slide talks about another quote from a client of mine who's an adult. This is from an adult client. I hate the holidays. If my family doesn't accept me, why should I? I wish my family could learn sign language. My family and I can't have meaningful conversations. I am left out. A lot of people typically say, oh, holidays. A lot of people struggle with the holidays, whether you're hearing or deaf. But there are many families that are dysfunctional. That is true. But the reason why deaf people tend to hate the holidays is not because of dysfunctionality, it's because of that lack of communication. They feel left out. And we have to have a safety plan, so to speak, for the holidays. Just a few weeks ago, I had clients worried about Thanksgiving. What am I going to do for Thanksgiving? So we had to develop and work through safety plans, how you can cope through the Thanksgiving holiday. So maybe bring a friend who knows sign language with you to dinner, or bring an interpreter. Ask your family to do an activity that you can participate in. A lot of different ways that I encourage my clients to work through that. But we are speaking of adults still suffering because of choices their parents made as they were growing up. All right, and I have just a few more slides. Again, I'd like to emphasize family communication impacts self-esteem. It's very interesting when you look at the research behind it. I'm not sure which one that was in, but the National Institute of Health did a comparison of the deaf child's typical self-esteem and how it was higher when they were in a family that signed, spoke, and fingerspelled, as opposed to only speaking in oralism methods. So there was a big difference there, a significant difference. Those who had a higher level of self-esteem also read better, had higher literacy rates, if you look at the third one. So higher levels of self-esteem and higher levels of literacy rates. Next slide. So some families still struggle with that communication piece. Communication doesn't always have to be verbal. There can be emotional communication, being emotionally available to your child. So I really like that phrase there that says the expression of emotion by a person taking care of the deaf child. So how do we express to them in a way that they understand and that they can feel the feelings being given to them? If a parent is grieving over a child with hearing loss, the deaf child, the child with hearing loss can feel that. They can feel that grief. They can feel that emanating from their own parent. And if they feel constant sadness, they attach that to their own deafness. It doesn't necessarily have to be a verbal message, but an emotional message, and that does impact language development as well. The interesting part here at the end here is higher stress families are harder for a deaf child to develop in. So if parents are much more accepting, the child has more opportunity to develop their language skills. And in closing, I know I hit a lot on a lot of the problems, but these are concerns that I see. every single one of my clients, 100% of my client base, have these problems. None of them have said, I have great communication access at home. All of them have told me, I wish my family could communicate with me. I wish this, I wish that. I see that every single day. And what a healthy deaf child would look like is here. When I say healthy and with self-esteem, that means being aware of their own weaknesses, their own strengths, and their own struggles and limitations, but working within those bounds and valuing other people who are different from themselves. Having a strong sense of belonging and knowing that I am part of a group, whether that's my family or the deaf community, but having that sense of belonging with a population and understanding their purpose here. Having a strong support system. It may not necessarily be friends or family, but having that support system. People like that tend to have less health problems when it comes to mental health. One factor to really encourage them to thrive is having a deaf role model in their life. I was just recently invited to present at the Utah Parent Center, and one parent had asked me, how do I learn how to model to my own deaf child? What the parent didn't realize is the deaf child needs to see another deaf adult, because a lot of deaf children grow up thinking that one day they'll be able to hear because they see their parents being able to hear, and that's the model they receive. They think that deafness is temporary because they don't ever see a deaf adult. So if they can see a deaf adult, they can see what a healthy deaf adult looks like, and they have a model in mind. All that being said, I really do feel that it is important to have dialogue about the social emotional learning and needs of these deaf children, and how that is impacted by school and home environments, and how we can collaborate to have a stronger growth in mental health, in addition to being aware of the trauma that they deal with every day, even in the classroom. If there's a moment where the teacher stops signing, that is traumatic for a deaf child. A single moment where something is not accessible is traumatic to a deaf child. So I think being more trauma-informed in the school setting will only help these children heal and develop stronger senses of self-esteem and be healthier. If you have any questions, please feel free.
Perfect.
All right,
Board
thank you for your
Member
time.
Brittany Cummins.
I do have one question.
Yes.
Thank you for coming today. It's a fascinating presentation. You mentioned several times that youth grow up without being able to communicate fully with their families. How common is it for a deaf child to grow up in a home where their parents don't speak or aren't fluent in sign language or another communication method? Is that common?
Yes. The national statistics show, and I can back up a little bit on that concept. Right now, it's 90 to 95% of deaf children are in family environments that they're the only deaf child in the family. They're in a hearing family. 90 to 95%. Out of that 90 to 95%, 78% of those families do not sign. That means access to information is extremely limited. Speaking is not the most effective approach if it's there without gestural communication or sign language. So for example, lip reading, even the best lip reader can only catch about 30% of what's being said. That's not a lot of information, and this is very common on a national scale, including in our own state. The population of deaf students that are here graduating from USDB, because previously there was a program where they were not allowed to sign years and years ago, and they wanted a support group to deal with those feelings that had emerged from those experiences, not having communication access. So there's a huge impact underlying there, and it is present here in Utah as well, definitely.
Board Member Jenny Earl.
Thank you. Hi. So I have a son that is diabetic, and I very much appreciated we had some resources, individuals that came to us and said, we want your son to actually meet other diabetic youth. Because, and I appreciate what you've said about individuals with similar disabilities being able to relate to one another because it creates a camaraderie. And in my son's case, he saw that he could be a benefit to others that were struggling with some of the same trials that I couldn't understand as a mom, because I insisted that certain things were certain ways, and anyways, it was a refreshing thing. So I'm glad that that is part of the dialogue that you have going on. So.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for your comments. I would like to add a note to that. Last night, I was as a part of a panel for health and dementia at the Park City Library. They showed a video called The Moonlight Sonata. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that video. They had a discussion that was very interesting where they talked about instead of getting the child to understand our world, we need to understand their world. We need to put ourselves in their shoes, and I really like that perspective change. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, next we have Mark Marsh over here.
Thank you for coming today and giving us a little bit of an experience about what you go through in your daily life. You mentioned that you have role models or would like children or grown-ups to have role models, important figure people who are deaf and who can sign. Could you give us some examples of some of those people that you may suggest?
Yes, and that's a great question. In the community we have here in Utah, we have a lot of good deaf role models. So for example, the Sanderson Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing in Taylorsville has a case management team and an interpreting team where there are a lot of deaf role models present. So I tend to collaborate with them at the Deaf Center, as we call it. We have a lot of staff that work there that are deaf themselves, our agency included, the Segalili Center for Abuse Deaf. There's a lot of senior citizens that go to the Deaf Center and they're deaf themselves, and they are great role models as well because they have gone through life, they've lived a long time, and they've had these experiences. The deaf school also has been great. They've invited a lot of deaf people to come out to campus, such as for Red Ribbon Week, or even myself to come out and model to these students. We run a teen support group, and I think that is great for them to see, hey, these are deaf adults just like me. And some of them have seen me and said, I want to be a counselor one day. Or they meet another deaf person and say, oh, I would like to work in the field they're working in. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot of resources that way. And USDB does provide deaf mentors for the families for our PIT program from 0 to 3. So the Deaf Mentorship Program in Utah is focused on selecting candidates to run that program that are strong deaf people with great language modeling and strong candidates. A lot of parents learn sign language, but they learn it as a second language. They're second language learners. So the child may be looking at a second language learner model. So it's very important for them to interact with native signers and native speakers of the language. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any of the questions or comments. Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
And helping us. I want to recognize real fast our interpreters. Thank you for being here. Our interpreters, want to thank them for being here, and can we get your names? And thank you for your service here.
Absolutely. My name's Tony Bonnie.
Tony.
Bethany Hammond.
And Bethany. Thank you for what you do.
Both of my parents are deaf. It is my first language. Thank you. And I actually know his parents. I love his parents.
Okay. Thank you.
I started learning in school and then went to
And I'd also like to say, I appreciate having the interpreters here as well. I can't imagine giving a presentation without them. So thank you to them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Did you have a follow-up?
Real quick comment. Board members, I know that, especially right when some of you came on board to the board, that wasn't meant to be a pun, but when you first arrived here, I know we were right in the middle of some controversial topics that had to do with the oral and the ASL English programs and so forth. And I thought this would be really helpful now that a lot of that is settled down to see to help you understand our mindset and why we accept everything and we encourage everything, and we really struggle with models that tell parents you should not allow your deaf child to have one kind of access because it'll stop another. That's not what the research shows. And with the trauma-informed practices, and also through the lens of social emotional learning, which is really finally taking hold in public education, where we look at the whole child, I just thought, well, there is not a better case study with very, very clear outcomes to when we do more than just the academics, which are still very important, but when we educate that whole child, how much more successful their lives can be. And the last thought I had on this was, for long before my time, USDB has different superintendents and board members have been trying to assemble pieces of land and so forth to create an outdoor learning center where families can come together in the summers and learn. And we're slowly continuing to work on that. We've shifted it to the foundation now. We're not going to be requesting legislative money or anything, but that is still very much a goal because of the added importance for our families to all learn together. And now I thought this just painted the perfect picture of why, I mean, it's not going to be surprising to any of us that strong families create healthier people, but in this case, it's even that much more important. And I said that was the last point, but that's not. This is the last point I was going to make. You were probably thinking, like I was during the presentation, oh, I bet a lot of this applies to our students who are blind and visually impaired as well. Absolutely correct. With some differences, because it's not necessarily communication-based, but there are still just as intense social emotional learning needs. And so I anticipate in the future we'll have a similar presentation through the lens of our students and their families who are blind. So that's all I wanted to say at the end.
Well, thank you. This ends this agenda item, and we're going to move to our next, which is an information item on an update on, well, it's our strategic plan performance measure. So, Superintendent,
This
are
is
you doing this one?
Yes, this is super fast. You have a link to the strategic plans that we reviewed when we got together in our annual meeting recently. And the last link is also, I promised you at that time that we were going to put some numbers to these things. This has always been an ongoing challenge for us because we can't use the traditional tools always that most of our students in the public education system are measured by to show meaningful growth and so forth. So I just wanted you to be aware that we've developed this document. We have put some measurable goals in place for a few of the items in our main areas of the strategic plan. And we don't necessarily need to review those right now, but I'd be happy to talk about them if you have questions at future meetings or so forth. This is more of a follow-through item when I said we'd be putting some goals in there that are measurable for the future annual kind of measurements. And these are very consistent with the annual report we produce for the state legislature each year as well.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of our agenda. Is there any questions or comments from board members? Board Member Linda Hansen.
I'm running out of opportunities to make comments. I just wanted to say thanks to Joel. You know, he's been a great superintendent and a good friend. And I appreciate, sorry, Joel. I appreciate the love he has for the kids and the hard work he's done at USDB, and I just wanted him to know that. And the staff, you guys have been great.
Thank you. And thank you for all your support.
Board Member Linda Hansen's last meeting, and we enjoyed having her on our board and also her contribution to the Board for the Deaf and Blind and advocacy there. So we very much appreciate her. And before we adjourn, thank you, Superintendent. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you to your staff and the deaf and blind community, education community for making all those wonderful things happen. And we look forward to our next meeting. And again, Superintendent, reach out if there's something we need to be doing or doing more of. Please reach out. So thank you for what you do and safe travels. We still have more meetings today, board members. They start right at 1. Is that correct, Ms. Lorraine? And so we're going to have a quick opportunity to have some lunch and catch up on phone calls. And So we'll see you guys at your correct places at 1 o'clock. So thank you, USDB, and take care and drive safe. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.